Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to be covering one interesting fact about every Australian Prime Minister. I was recently thinking how there's a lot of content of this nature about American presidents on YouTube, which led me to the concerning revelation that I know more about the American presidents than I do about the leaders of my own country, so I'm going to be attempting to remedy that a bit with this video. But anyways, let's get straight into the video with the first Prime Minister, Edmund Barton. Edmund Barton was known to be quite an avid sportsman, and in 1879 he umpired a cricket match at the SCG, or Sydney Cricket Ground, between New South Wales and an English touring side captained by Lord Harris. After a controversial decision by Barton's colleague George Coulthard against the home side, the crowd spilled onto the pitch and assaulted some of the English players, leading to international cricket's first riot. In the subsequent public controversy, Barton defended his colleague's decision and did not spare the crowd. The publicity that attended the young Barton's presence of mind in diffusing the situation supposedly helped him take his first steps towards becoming Australia's first Prime Minister, winning a state lower house seat later that year. Alfred Deakin had a long political career, but was forced to leave politics in 1913 due to him suffering from the early stages of an unknown degenerative neurological condition. In his personal diaries, he meticulously documented his loss of function and increasing anguish at his decline. He had initially hoped his symptoms, primarily consisting of memory loss, were due to stress and that leaving politics would aid his recovery, but instead found that, when I stepped out of Parliament, in some mysterious fashion all my memories commenced to die or disappear. With his disease worsening, in December 1915 he wrote that, "I have now become a mere juggler with myself. My helpless attempts to read the riddle of my mind and thought must be frankly abandoned." Sadly, Deakin's condition would continue to worsen over the next couple of years before he ultimately died at his home on the 7th of October 1919, aged just 63. The third Prime Minister, Chris Watson, was a man of interesting origins to say the least. He was born in Valparaiso, Chile, to a German-Chilean seaman. His family soon moved to the South Island of New Zealand, however, where he spent the majority of his youth. He only actually moved to Australia in 1886 at the age of 19, where he soon became prominent in the local labour movement. Watson's successor, George Reid, despite being by all accounts a very intelligent man, hated school and once stated that he had no appetite for that wide range of metaphysical propositions which juveniles were expected to comprehend. He also found Greek a lazy horror. I know that one's a bit boring, but other than him being born in Scotland, there aren't many interesting facts about this guy. No offence, George. The next Prime Minister was actually Alfred Deakin again, but the next unique one was Andrew Fisher. Similarly to Deakin, Fisher also served 3 terms as Prime Minister and became the first Prime Minister to willingly resign his position in October 1915 in favour of his deputy, Billy Hughes, due to the stresses and demands of Australia's participation in World War I. Joseph Cook was the Prime Minister of Australia during the first 6 weeks of Australia's involvement in World War I. Before the official declaration of war, Cook stated to remember that when the Empire is at war, so is Australia at war, depicting the sentiment of most Australians at the time. Cook would go on to have 3 sons serve in the AIF during the war, one of whom was twice wounded at Gallipoli but miraculously survived. Billy Hughes, like many Prime Ministers, spent his early years in the UK, spending the first 22 years of his life in Wales. He later recalled these years as the happiest of his life and was extremely proud of his Welsh heritage. Hughes would later call Welsh the language of heaven, despite his own grasp of the language being a bit patchy, as he had no formal schooling in Welsh and subsequently had difficulties with spelling, which if you've seen a lot of Welsh words is not that surprising. Nonetheless, he received and replied to correspondence from Welsh speakers throughout his political career, and as Prime Minister, famously traded insults in Welsh with David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of the UK at the time. Stanley Bruce hated his given name and throughout his life preferred to be known by his initials SM. He disliked his first name so much that when he became Prime Minister, he issued a note to the press asking newspapers to use his initials and not his given name. The next Prime Minister, James Scullin, was the first Catholic as well as the first Irish Australian to serve as Prime Minister. Joseph Lyons holds the quite morbid record of being the first Prime Minister to die in office when he suffered a heart attack on the 5th of April 1939 while being driven from Melbourne to Sydney. Lyons was rushed to St Vincent's Hospital in Darlinghurst, Sydney in critical condition, but unfortunately by the following day he had become unable to speak and was drifting in and out of consciousness. He soon fell into a coma and died on the morning of the 7th of April, which was Good Friday. Earl Page's middle name was Christmas, which was supposedly given to him to carry on the surname of a childless relative. Robert Menzies is Australia's longest serving Prime Minister, serving a whopping 18 years and 163 days total over 2 terms. Arthur Fadden was not much liked throughout his political career, and in 1969 published a memoir titled They Called Me Artie. It wasn't a big hit with the press, however, as Don Aitken of the Canberra Times observed that Fadden had the reputation of a political buffoon, a man of earthy wit, and hail fellow well-metness, I've never heard that saying before, who survived in politics because he knew more and better stories than the next man. His autobiography does little to destroy that picture. John Curtin is most known for his leading of the country throughout the majority of World War II, which only ended when he tragically died in office just weeks before the end of the war in the Pacific on the 5th of July 1945. The stresses of war are said to have played a large part in his premature death at the age of just 60. Frank Ford was the shortest serving Prime Minister in Australia's history, serving for just 7 days following the death of the aforementioned John Curtin. Similarly to George Reid, I couldn't really find many interesting facts about Ben Chifley, again, no offence mate, but apparently he's considered one of Australia's greatest Prime Ministers for his efforts in the reconstruction immediately following World War II, and loved reading. Obviously Harold Holt is most known for the mysterious circumstances around his death/disappearance, but I've already made a separate video on that which I'll link in the description, so I think I'll cover something a little less known about him instead. Harold Holt first enlisted in the militia a few months before the outbreak of World War II in February 1939, joining a part-time artillery unit for businessmen and professionals while still serving in Parliament. Later in May 1940, with the war in full swing, without resigning his seat mind you, enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force, or AIF, with the intent of becoming a full soldier. He had actually been offered a commission as an officer in the Air Force, but declined due to his lack of experience. Following his enlistment, Holt stated that, as the youngest member of the House, I could not feel happy in my position if I were not prepared to make some sacrifice and take an active part. He was soon sent to Puckapunyal for training and was expected to be posted to North Africa or Palestine. His brief military career came to an end as a result of the Canberra air disaster on the 13th of August, which killed 3 senior government ministers. Following this, the Prime Minister at the time, Robert Menzies, asked Holt to return to Cabinet, which he promptly did. Quite tragically, John McEwen recounted in his memoirs that he had almost no memories of his parents. This is because his mother died of lung disease in March 1902, just before his 2nd birthday, followed by his father 5 years later from meningitis in September 1907 when he was just 7 years old. Similarly to a few other Prime Ministers, John Gorton served in World War II as a fighter pilot in Malaya and New Guinea. In 1942, Gorton was involved in a brief dogfight over the South China Sea, after which he suffered an engine failure and was forced to land on Bintan Island, 40 kilometers southeast of Singapore. As he landed, one of the Hurricane's wheels hit an embankment and flipped over. Gorton was not properly strapped in during this crash landing, and as a result, his face smashed into the gun sight and windscreen, mutilating his nose and breaking both cheekbones. He also suffered severe lacerations to both his arms. He managed to make his way out of the wreck, however, and was rescued by members of the Royal Dutch East Indies Army, who provided some medical treatment. Gorton later claimed that his face was so badly cut and bruised that a member of the RAF sent to collect him assumed he was near death, collected his personal effects, and returned to Singapore without him. So clearly not a very good soldier there. Luckily for Gorton, another pilot, Matt O'Mara, also crash-landed on the island a week later and arranged for them to be collected. Literally 2 days after they returned to Singapore, Gorton was put on an ammunition ship bound for Jakarta, which was subsequently torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sank. Gorton then spent almost a day on a crowded life raft in shark-infested waters with little drinking water until the raft was spotted by a friendly ship and him and his companions were saved. Despite having 3 children and a wife, there were frequent rumours throughout William McMahon's life that he was gay. This suggestion was repeatedly denied by his wife Sonia, which on one occasion in the 1970s resulted in the hilarious tabloid headline, "My Billy's no..." Yeah, I can't say that on YouTube. Sonia tells. Gough Whitlam, whose full name was actually Edward Gough Whitlam, was Australia's tallest Prime Minister at 6'4", which strangely enough makes him the same height as America's tallest President, Abraham Lincoln. Malcolm Fraser took his seat in Parliament at the age of just 25, making him the youngest sitting MP by 4 years and the first who had been too young to serve in World War II. Unlike most Prime Ministers I'd imagine, Bob Hawke knew he would be one from a young age, apparently boasting to his friends at the age of just 15 that he would one day become the Prime Minister of Australia. Also the beer sculling record, but everyone knows about that. Not a very good fact here for Paul Keating, as during his stint as Prime Minister in August 1993, he received the lowest approval rating for any Australian Prime Minister since modern political polling began. This is apparently partially due to the nefarious ways he gained the Prime Ministership to begin with. He is also the first Prime Minister on this list who is still alive today, being 79 years old at the time of recording. John Howard is most notable for his reformation of gun laws in Australia in response to the Port Arthur massacre, which occurred in his first of 2 terms as Prime Minister and earned him widespread support among Australians. In fact, both my parents are quite big fans of John Howard for that very reason. Not knowing much about Kevin Rudd, I didn't really expect this one, but apparently he graduated from the Australian National University with honours in Chinese studies and can speak Mandarin fluently. Now we are finally getting to the Prime Ministers that I actually personally remember, as I was 6 years old when Julia Gillard took office. Julia Gillard is most notable for being the first and only female Prime Minister in Australian history at this point. This is another one that most Australians would know about, but Tony Abbott actually ate a raw onion live on TV. He later explained that many of us eat raw onions all the time and that the bulb was beautiful to chow down on. He further explained that his unusual voraciousness while eating said onion was merely to show appreciation to a hard-working Tasmanian farmer who I assume had provided the onion. In 2008, Malcolm Turnbull became the first Liberal leader to have admitted to smoking weed, which is not really something I'd expect a politician to admit, especially considering it's still illegal in Australia, but you do you, man. I'm honestly surprised I've never heard of this, given ScoMo is the second most recent Prime Minister of Australia at the moment, but apparently he had a brief career as a child actor and appeared in several TV ads and small roles in local shows. Now, we are finally at the current Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. Growing up, Albanese never knew his father and was told that he had died in a car accident. His father, however, was still alive, and Albanese would only meet him for the first time in 2009 when he was 46 years old. Interestingly, Albanese's father is Italian, making Albanese the first Italian Australian Prime Minister and one of only 4 Australian Prime Ministers to not be entirely of Anglo-Celtic descent. Well, there we have it. That is one fact about every Australian Prime Minister. If you'd like to see more videos along these lines or about the Australian Prime Ministers, please do let me know in the comments, as I did really enjoy researching this one. But anyways, with that being said, thank you for watching, and as always, I hope you have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one.